Happy Friday, everyone. Meteorologist John Homenuk with Empire Weather with your latest agriculture long-range video update. Rain is ongoing across a lot of the Midwest and spreading into the Ohio Valley, so let's get right into it. Here's your current radar. We have these areas of showers and storms. We mentioned yesterday in a lot of our products that we'd be looking at the Des Moines area as kind of the boundary between where we'd see the potential for heavier rain and not. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing this morning. You can see the dividing line here between where that rain is occurring and where it isn't. We've had some rainfall in northeast Iowa as well as southeast Minnesota, and this complex is going to move off to the south and east over the next couple of hours. If we zoom in and look at what's going on here across parts of northern Illinois, we have periods of heavy rainfall occurring in southern Wisconsin into northern Illinois, again, parts of eastern Iowa as well. And this is spreading off to the south and east and will continue to do that, making its way into parts of northern Indiana. Now, models are suggesting it will weaken a bit, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get rid of all this precipitation, really developing into a little bit of a meso-low here. You can see that curl here to the precipitation moving off to the south and east, and this will likely continue to do that for the next few hours. Models doing an okay job with it. Let's look at the HRRR, which is one of our high resolution models. And you can see that as of this morning, it's got a pretty good handle on what's going on. It's doing a decent job, and it slides this off to the south and east. You can see this area of rain continuing into parts of northern Indiana as well as parts of Michigan. And then as we head into later tonight, it spreads out into more isolated shower and storm activity. But still, a decent rain event that has moved from southern Minnesota into Wisconsin, eastern Iowa, northern Illinois, and Indiana, which is almost exactly where we anticipated. NAM model also doing an okay job with this morning. A little overzealous with precipitation, but that's pretty typical for the NAM. But it still is doing an okay job of pinning down where this is going. And it does bring the area of rain into northern Indiana as well as Michigan as well later today. And you'll see that the NAM also tries to redevelop some storms here across eastern Iowa and parts of Illinois. We'll have to keep an eye on that as well. So that system will head off to the south and east, and then we'll wait for our second disturbance. So here's our first disturbance this morning. We're looking here at what is vorticity in the atmosphere. So here are your heights. These individual lines are the heights at 500 millibars and mid-levels, and the colors are showing you the vorticity in the atmosphere. So what we like to see is more cyclonic vorticity here like this, and that's what's helping to tip off our storms this morning. You can see our disturbance here emerges from Canada early this morning and then drops down right here into parts of Wisconsin, Indiana, and Illinois. And this is exactly this lift in the atmosphere, these colors here. This is what's responsible for helping to form our storms today. And these are the kind of disturbances that ride along the periphery of these ridges, right? And this is what we were talking about when a lot of the forecasts were dry for this time period. We have to look beyond that, and we have to look at the possibility that the models, especially ensembles, are not going to pick up on these. So you may notice already that our next disturbance is coming here out of Idaho and is going to have a highway to track right along this ridge, right? So here it comes. It moves down. By the time we get to Saturday, we now have another disturbance that's sitting over this region. And so the meteorology of this tells you we should have another chance for storms across this area, or maybe even this area, by the time we get Saturday into Sunday. There goes our disturbance kind of meandering about. And if we look at what the models do, let's check out the NAM model, which runs out during that time. Lo and behold, here come more showers and storms across this entire area thanks to that disturbance. Now, models differ on exactly how far north specifically these rains will extend, but we're looking at least parts of Iowa into parts of Illinois and Indiana into the Ohio Valley on Saturday night into Sunday. Let's look at the European model's depiction of this, and you can see it develops those storms and moves them into parts of the Ohio Valley, sort of the same as the NAM, but a little further south. You can see this is more into parts of Missouri, south central Illinois, and Indiana and Ohio as well, whereas the NAM is a bit further north and includes more north central of those states. Regardless, and we'll have to pin down exactly where we expect these storms to track, regardless, it's very likely that we will see the development of additional storm complexes from Saturday into Sunday. Now, what we like to do is, this is the operational models idea, that, and you know, obviously the meteorology behind it, we talked about that lift. It's likely we're getting another disturbance. That makes a lot of sense. Let's look at the ensembles real quick, though. I want to pull those up, and we'll check out a graphic that I've been liking over the past couple of days, and that's the probability of 1 inch of rain total to see the areas that are most likely to be impacted by that heavy precipitation. And let's zoom into the Ohio Valley here. And here's where the European says that through Monday, there's a good chance of at least 1 inch of rain. And this helps us visualize where the heavier precipitation is going to be according to this model. It's doing a good job so far this morning in parts of Wisconsin and northern Illinois. So this is the ensemble saying if you are in these areas where it's yellow, orange, or red, you're likely going to see an inch of rain. And so the losers in this complex, this whole entire thing, even if we back this up to look at a 1/2 inch of precipitation, are west central Iowa and parts of west central Illinois. These are the areas that are missing out, southwest Minnesota also included. This is the area that is not capitalizing on these rains through Monday, and that includes both storm complexes. Now, this is going to become important. These areas are going to become important because they've had some dryness, and now they're missing out on these storm clusters, and these areas will obviously be a focus moving forward. Other areas, this really from Wisconsin to northern Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, also down into parts of Kentucky and Tennessee that have really needed the rain. Even this part of central Missouri that we talked about yesterday needed some rain as well. West central Missouri is looking at least a 1/2 inch of rainfall. And then again, here are your probabilities for 1 inch of rainfall. And you can see where that axis really is over the next couple of days with those storm clusters. So let's back up for a second. We know we have these storm clusters for the next couple of days, and I want to take a look at where we are over the last 30 days. We've been using this graphic quite a bit. Obviously, there has been quite a great deal of concern about what's going on in the southern plains, and you can see why we have widespread areas here in the southern plains, south central United States, that have been much drier than normal. This area is a major deficit over the last 30 days here. You can see that very clearly. We also have additional areas of dryness from central Minnesota into central Wisconsin, this area right here. Parts of Iowa into parts of Nebraska have been drier than normal. And then we have this area here that's getting rainfall over the next couple of days, but remains drier than normal over the last 30 days. And these are important regions. The main area of concern is here over the south central United States, extending from Texas into Oklahoma into the Arlatex region. We also have some drought developing in parts of New England as well. This is somewhat unusual. It's been quite a while since we've seen this area get such a precipitation deficit. Looking at the latest drought monitor, it echoes the thoughts that we just talked about and what we were looking at from those anomalies. Now remember, a drought is a long-term hazard, right? It doesn't change day to day. But we can see the areas that have expanded here. We just talked about those deficits, and this is the expansion of that drought. Obviously, the main concern here is across the southern plains. These are in exceptional drought regions. But we also have drought expanding this way. We just mentioned that this part of Iowa missed those rains today, and we'll miss them again this weekend. But we have this drought expanding to the north and west here. And we also have this drought expanding into this region. And we mentioned Minnesota and Wisconsin, too. This area is showing up now as well. And so these are going to be the areas that we need to focus on here over the next couple of days, because the warmth and dryness in these regions is going to start to have an effect on the crop if we don't get those rains. Now, we're getting rains into this area. We'll likely see this area take a little bit of the edge off. But from the southern plains into parts of the Arlatex, really no relief coming. And then we have to also focus on this area of Iowa and Minnesota into Wisconsin. So let's look at the pattern and what's going on over the next couple of days, right? We know that we're having some change go on in the Pacific, and I want to mention what's important about that. The trade winds are still cranking when it comes to La Nina. We still have La Nina in control. That is very well established. And the MJO has been pushed out of the driver's seat. We talked about that as well, and I'll break that down in a moment. But the wave pattern here and the temperature pattern is arguing for a change, and that change is starting to manifest in the weather models. We have ridging now that is north and west of Hawaii, so these warmer temperatures encouraging that. That's also going to help to push a jet stream further north in this general vicinity. We've lost the cool waters off the coast of North America. That was encouraging troughing here and keeping ridging further east in this area. With this warm anomaly shifting further west and us losing the coherency of the cool anomalies here, we're likely going to start to see a pattern that favors ridging northwest of Hawaii, troughing closer to the west coast but off into the Gulf of Alaska, and then ridging centered closer to the Four Corners region, shifting to the west over time. If we look at what the models are doing, the European ensemble, and we check out exactly how the pattern is evolving, that's what we're seeing. Now, we know the ridging earlier in this month and back into June was here. It was across the Ohio Valley. We're seeing that shift back to the west now, and you can see exactly the pattern that we talked about from the Pacific Ocean, this is pretty much exactly what we just highlighted from a sea surface temperature perspective. So this is the general pattern that we're getting into over the next couple of days. Now, we do have a couple more storm cluster chances coming up, though, because if we go and look at what's going on with the MJO, it's not completely dead yet. Here's the overall pattern, and we'll notice that over the next couple of days, you see these blues and greens extending from left to right as time goes on, right? If we look at the MJO and we look at where we are here in the Pacific Ocean, these blues and greens are extending from left to right here from the Indonesian region into parts of the Central Pacific. And that keeps momentum moving towards the Americas, at least temporarily here. We still are forecast to get into this standing wave pattern here. But before then, we have some momentum coming from left to right across the Pacific. If we go back and look at the European ensemble, and we look at what the model is suggesting will happen, here comes a Pacific disturbance in the early to middle part of next week. And you'll see that disturbance slide right over the top of, here's our ridge. This thing comes right out, and we have just enough momentum out of that North Pacific that this comes over the top of our ridge into the northern plains right here. And so what the models are suggesting, if we go back and we look at the precipitation forecast, is a development of a storm complex across the northern plains. Now, it remains to be seen how far south this storm complex will track. If we look at the latest European ensemble, it's likely that this is going to be a northern plains event. It's going to track over through the northern plains, parts of North Dakota, Minnesota, and then down into Wisconsin and possibly Michigan. But we'll have to watch the southern end of this. The Storm Prediction Center has issued a risk area for Tuesday, this yellow area here for Tuesday. That includes parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, northeast Iowa, parts of northern Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. And if we go back and look at what the European ensemble is suggesting, that makes sense. Here's your cold front coming down associated with this little low pressure area and that disturbance. And so that is an important disturbance to monitor over the next couple of days. We see the models depicting the disturbance moving over the top of the ridge here. Here it comes off of the Pacific Ocean and then down around the ridge into parts of the northern plains. And that will be a potential storm cluster across this area early next week, likely further north than the one we are experiencing today. After that disturbance moves off to the north and east, we're back into a northwest flow pattern for a bit late next week, with the ridging moving off to the west here in the Four Corners region. And so the models are suggesting, if we look at 24-hour increments, that after this cluster dives down in the early to midweek period, after this cluster moves off to the north and east, we are going to see a drier period across the plains. This is valid through Friday. I'm going to pull up the 72-hour rainfall ending on Friday, and you can see this dryness starting to push in from the plains into the Ohio Valley. Normally, this wouldn't be overly concerning, but the issue we do have is that temperatures are warming significantly by the time we get into this period. The midweek temperatures for the 5 days ending on Friday are well above normal in the plains and well above normal also pushing into the Ohio Valley and the Midwest. So when you time that with the likelihood that we'll be dry, I think we'll start to see some of the risk reemerge during this time frame. Now, the good news is we mentioned the ridge moving back to the west, and as we get into the late July period and we close in on the 25th, the models are suggesting that this ridge will move back to the west. Now, we're likely going to see additional Pacific disturbances come out. However, the overall coverage of them remains in question, and the MJO is one of the main reasons. We mentioned the momentum here from the MJO eventually comes to a halt as we get close to the 21st. This is a standing wave pattern where you have upward motion here in this part of the Pacific and downward motion in this part of the Pacific. That kind of shuts off the Pacific jet. You had motion going here, but now you're backing it up and slowing things down. And so it remains to be seen how many disturbances are actually going to come over the top of this ridge. And with that being said, if you look at the moisture in place, the models are still suggesting, hey, there's going to be moisture here through around the 25th of the month. Here's your reservoir of moisture in the Four Corners. You can see where your ridge is here. You can see the flow around this ridge, right? Where your dryness is in the southern plains, and you should still get the opportunity for clusters here. If we go look at the precipitation anomalies from a 5-day anomaly perspective, this makes sense. Here's your signal here for moisture, and you can see exactly where the storm track would be over the top of this ridge into this region. So I think the overall thought is that the middle to latter part of next week looks dry, but there will be opportunities for this moisture to come over the top and move into parts of these regions. There will be storm clusters. There will be chances through late July. As we move into early August, the models are starting to suggest what we talked about a couple days ago. We mentioned this ridge continuing to push north and west, and that opening the door for some troughing here in the east. Look what the models are showing here as we get to the end of the run. I want to back this up here for a moment. All of a sudden, we have the pattern we talked about. We have one ridge here centered in the west central United States, and we have an Atlantic ridge building back to the west. The flow around ridges is clockwise, so this is going to start to pull moisture in from the Atlantic and even from parts of the Gulf as this trough develops in the Great Lakes and the Northeast, and that's going to allow moisture to start to build in this region. This could become another moisture source as it starts to push to the north and west eventually, and you can see models starting to pick up on that. As we head to the 7-day forecast here, here's your moisture eventually starting to back up. If we look at the weeklies too, you start to see that moisture push further to the west, actually getting into parts of the Ohio Valley by the time we get into the first week of August. And I think that's going to become a critical part of the forecast as we move into early August, is the propensity for this ridge to actually end up further west. We talked about why that would happen on the sea surface temperature anomalies. And that could open the door for this trough to form in the northeast and that moisture to start to return in from the east into that region. We'll have to watch the plains for potential drier trends as that occurs during that time frame. So again, we have a lot to work on over the next couple days. We'll work through these individual storm clusters. We'll watch the warm up in the middle of the week, and then we'll get into a pattern that should support more storm clusters as we move into late July and early August. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We will be with you guys throughout it all, through the weekend and into next week. With anything we can do to help, we'd be happy to help you. Have a wonderful Friday. We'll talk to you guys very soon. Take care.